Tilea's Troubles, Part 14. Another excerpt from Bonacorso Fidelibus's work, The Many Wars of the Early 25th Century. The summer of 2401 continued. In the far north-east of Tilea, the realm of Rivola had been swallowed entirely by Wizard Lord Bentiglovio's army of ogres. The few peasants who escaped the bloody turmoil reported that both Murato and Terme castles were now nothing more than lamentable, smoking ruins. Every knightly warrior, no matter how skilled in arms, how well protected by armour, how well mounted, had been laid low, beaten into the ground by huge clubs, and left to rot where they lay, uneaten by the brutes, perhaps simply because of the inconvenience of having to strip off the layers of armour. In Rivola itself, an awful new tyranny had begun, as Razga Bouldergut's monstrous thugs and their petty goblin servants swaggered drunkenly through the streets, playing cruel games with the cowering and slowly diminishing populace. It was feared that such easy victories and the loot so taken would draw ever more ogres from the east. No one knew how the Wizard Lord of Campagrotta intended to control his growing horde, or even if he intended to try. It was commonly assumed that he must either be entirely insane, unbalanced by his desire for revenge against the people of Tilea, or perhaps that he had ambitions to forge himself an empire encompassing the whole of northern Tilea, or both. Others believed that the dearth of public sightings revealed he had retreated into his palace to busy himself with some secret purpose, caring not a jot about the present activities of the brute army that enabled his return to Campagrotta. In the far south, the army of the VMC had marched in strength from Alcente against warlord Kernag's Wag. They declared their first battle a great victory, and to advertise their achievement, the Marienburgers printed a broadside to be distributed by their agents and merchants throughout Tilea. Their pride shined through. In Verezzo, the news of the VMC's victory arrived first in a muddled report, declaring not that they had defeated one of the Wag's forces, but that they had actually defeated the entire Wag, and driven all the greenskins into the very sea, there to drown. Joyous celebrations spread across the city-state, and in every street, alleyway and yard, drunken revellers were to be found. Several riots, fuelled by the high spirits, broke out. These were not the only things to break out. The prisoners held in the famous Lestanche fortress joined in the merriment, loudly proclaiming that they too should celebrate such good news. Overcoming their inebriated guards, they vanished into the equally befuddled crowd swarming through the streets. Turmoil of a different kind erupted in the northern city of Viadazan, where the populace feared the approach of the vampire Duke Alessandro Sforza of Miragliano. If the Duke's horde of abominations were to march south from Ibino and cross the river Tirano at the bridge of Pontremola, then Viadazan would surely become their next prey. Lord Adolfo hastily mustered an army of mariners, militia, mercenaries and brutes, and commandeered several vessels in the port to increase the size of his already substantial fleet. The city became a dizzy mix of drunken sailors, brawling ogres and swaggering condottieri, and every alehouse and tavern in the city was inhabited by a host of bearded seamen of suspicious origins and intentions. In amongst this heady swirl of brash braggadocio and salty slang, a somewhat incongruous religious movement was being born, focused upon the exiled Miraglianan priest Biagino Bolzano. Interlude: The Viadazan Crusade. Biagino would be the first to admit he had never expected to become one of the leaders of a crusade. An unlikely agitator, unskilled in rhetoric, and unaccustomed as he was to giving speeches to the ragged masses, he had instead begun his work by approaching the city's Morite clergy, His intention was, via priestly intervention, to convince Lord Adolfo to do something more than merely improve Viadaz's defences. Biagino sought a much more aggressive response, just as the Holy Church of Moors Archlector Calixtus II had called for in his decrees, with large armies allying to wipe Duke Alessandro and his undead minions from the face of Tilea. The Moorite church in Viadaza, however, was rather neglected by the secular authorities. The ruling classes considered it simply to be just one of the churches serving the three gods at the pinnacle of the Tilean pantheon. To most nobles, it was the church a family turned to when a member died, with more the focus of prayers and dedications solely during the time of mourning. As in so many city-states across Tilea, the Church of Moor was served far more keenly by the common folk. The poor, labouring classes had little need of myrmidia or mercopio for war strategies and mercantile fortune, but Moor was important to them. Death comes to everyone, and for the poor it can be almost always present, whether it be through disease, starvation, punishment or violence. The hard nature of their existence put prayers to Moor, for themselves or their loved ones, on the lips of the poor on an almost daily basis. Thus it was that Biagino's efforts resulted in the birth of a movement, first amongst his brother priests and then the common people. He spoke of the need to act quickly, assuredly, and without division, against a wicked enemy that threatened not just the rule of princes and dukes, replacing one lord with another, but threatened the very life of every Tilean. This chimed with the fears of the common people of Viadaza, from the middling merchants, sea artists and craftsmen, down to the lowliest of Lord Adolfo's subjects. Such unswerving conviction won over the priests and brothers who took up his call. Soon every church and temple to Moor was filled with eager supplicants as the priests spread the message and the people turned to Moor for their salvation. As he began his second month in the city, Biagino found himself in Galasco Square, in Viadaza's eastern quarter, standing beside Gonzalvo Cerci, the local temple's incumbent. A crowd had gathered, much bigger than could fit within the temple building, a veritable sea of folk. The very old and the very young were there, citizens of every kind, even some ladies. But it was the men of fighting age who Biagino scrutinised. They were the ones who must respond to the church's call. This battle would be their burden. As Gonzalvo began his sermon, Biagino turned his attention onto him, recognising quickly that the spirit of the famous radical Moorite reformer Sagranalo was flowing through his brother priest. Gonzalvo's widened eyes lent his gaze a piercing quality, and although he was tonsured like most of the lesser clergy of Moor, the remainder of his flowing black hair swished about wildly as he gesticulated and pointed. He raised his hand to the skies when he spoke of Moor, and swept both arms outwards as if to embrace the entire crowd when talking of the people. He began by announcing that even though a great threat loomed over all in Tilea, there was hope, for the god Moor was with them, and that they themselves were the vessels which that hope would fill. They were to become the soldiers of Moor, servants of not only the church, but of the greatest of gods, and there was no better god to serve in a war against the undead. By now the crowd was hooked, and Gonzalvo was in full flight. Lord Guglielmo, Holy Moor protect him now and for ever, was ruled by honour. He rode against the foul foe for the sake of his family name, for his own inheritance, and to save his noble cousin the Duchess Maria. No one can fault him for that. But he had only a handful of companions, hoping that instead of unholy cause and numbers, surprise and speed might grant him victory. Our own efforts will be very different from his doomed quest, for we will be many, ready in both body and soul, and we shall serve directly the great god Moor, yea, even becoming his brandished blade to smite the corruption that mocks his rightful rule over the dead. More than this, even though no more is required for our eternal reward, we will serve earthly Viadaza by driving the invaders far from its lands. We will serve our families, friends and neighbours all. As blessed warriors of More, we will face what so many run from, and so fight that which, if allowed to flourish, would bring eternal ruin to all those we love. It is the only course open to us, the one sure and certain way to save ourselves and serve our God. For if we do not do so, then all those we love are doomed to everlasting torment, their souls forced to remain in this world even after death, animating their own rotting corpses in thrall to wicked masters. Biagino could see fear on many of the faces below in the square. Gonzalvo's words were unsettling them. Of course they were. These were unsettling times, and Gonzalvo was simply telling things as they were. Yet Biagino guessed there was more to it. His brother priest knew exactly how his words would be received. This speech was to be a journey in which doubts would be addressed, fears removed, until in the end the happy destination was reached. At least that was what Biagino hoped. I say to you, you can, you ought to be afraid, continued Gonzalvo. You should be afraid. You must use that fear rather than let it rule you. It can fuel a fire in your belly. A fearful warrior can either run or fight. Those who choose to run from this enemy will never be counted amongst the blessed of More, nor can they expect his favour. And as holy More turns his loving gaze from them, they run towards everlasting doom. For the foul servants of vampires and necromancers never grow weary, and when the living start to stumble, breathless and aching, the undead draw steadily, inevitably closer. If, on the other hand, you choose to stand and fight, you will do so as holy instruments, as More sees full well your fear, understands the heroic effort it takes to master it and make it yours, and he will love you all the more for it. More's love, expressed through his divine blessing, is the greatest weapon a man can employ against the undead. It will hone your blades, steady your aim, and strengthen your armour. His will shall inspire our commanders, his presence shall dismay the foe, his power, made manifest through his priest's prayers, shall entirely unravel the vampire duke's enchantments. Fear does not make you weak, not if you have the courage of conviction. You are not alone, for look, you have each other, nor are you helpless, because More himself will guide you, shield you, and make you strong. Biagino was impressed. Gonzalvo had a talent for this. Looking at the crowd, who stood silently, awestruck, he wondered whether, instead of Sagranalo's spirit, it was More himself working through his brother priest. If Biagino, a mere clerk of the church who happened to be lucky enough to escape the fall of Miragliano, could dream of visitations by More's servants, why couldn't such a man as Gonzalvo, a priest of imposing stature and real authority, momentarily manifest divine enlightenment? Perhaps you are thinking, but I am unskilled in the art of war. I have never prayed to Mimidia. I have never swung a sword, nor drilled to learn my place in rank and file. Well, I say this to you. Every able-bodied man here has strength enough in his arm to lift a blade, and but one strike of that blade is all that is required to fell a walking corpse. You do not need the nimble skill of a gladiator or the honed practice of a duellist, simply a strong heart. All you need is to stand resolute before the vileness and stench of the undead, for in so doing More's blessing will wax strong in you. If you can do this, then the foe cannot win. As easily as a butcher wields his cleaver, a woodsman wields an axe, a fisherman wields a gutting knife, your blades will do their bloody work, and blow by blow the horror will diminish. Holy More will laugh with glee, and his joy will fill you with bliss. You will be lifted above other men, blessed both in this life and in death. We will win, because More will guide us. More's spirit will work within us, and victorious, More will reward us, now and for evermore. A cheer went up, and Biagino could see that men, mostly the younger sort, were pushing to the fore. They were ready, in this very moment, to join the cause, to fight the fight. Gonzalvo leaned across to him and muttered, waste not, want not, then joined the priests, both those before and amongst the crowd, in greeting, accepting, and ushering the willing volunteers in the right direction. Within an hour, a new regiment was formed. Soon, very soon by the looks of it, an entire army would be ready. Not Lord Adolfo's army, but More's army. Bonacorso Fidelibus, the summer of 2401, continued. Elsewhere in Tilea, strange and intriguing events were occurring. It was reported that an ambassadorial party had been thrown from the city of Trantio, while another such party, in order to escape jail in Raverno, had been forced to hurl themselves out of the windows. Rumours of arcane magical constructions emanated from the city realm of Porto Maggiore. Some claimed that a clock tower of solid brass was being built, able to suck bolts of lightning from the sky so that none could harm the citizens below. Others said that a magical statue had been fashioned that could speak truthful, if cryptic, answers to all questions put to it, while the rest believed a massive cannon had been forged with the power to send an 80-pound round shot of iron more than a mile. Confused accounts spread through the south that an Arabian army had invaded the peninsula, although in truth it was merely that Arabian mercenaries were still being hired by the boy king of Lucini. He was supposed to have said, in private, that Tyleans make poor soldiers compared to the men of the southern deserts, although many reported that even an immature boy would not believe such nonsense. Arabians, Marienburgers, ogres, green-skinned corsairs. These were the kind of warriors lured to the realm to fight the battles of the unfolding wars of the north and the south. More than a few Tyleans grew afraid, worried that these mercenary armies might themselves become new enemies. Praemonitus, praemunitus, cried the scholars, but such was the general clamour that few heard.